If you're like most Americans, if you look at your power bill today versus 1 year ago, you'll see it's gone up on average 10%, which is pretty crazy for just 1 year. The average American is paying 30% more for their electric bill than they were back in 2020. By the year 2030, it's expected to go up another 10 to 40%, and it is getting bad. There are two main reasons for this. The first one is data centers. Between the years of 2025 and 2028, the usage of electricity that data centers use is expected to double, and that is essentially the same as taking the entire country of Spain, all of their electrical needs, and adding it to our existing grid. Which brings me to our second reason, which is our outdated grid. Most of the grid that we use here in America was built in the 1960s and 1970s, and as a result, the majority of what's on your bill is not going towards actually producing electricity or the cost of electricity, but it's the cost of updating our outdated grid. New poles, new lines, new substations, all of that actually costs more than the electricity that you're using. I decided to get off that train, and I want to show you how you can do the same thing. DIY solar is way more accessible than most people think. In fact, I built this whole mini mock-up here, this demo, to show you exactly what steps are involved in doing your own solar on your own roof. Over the next several minutes, I'll show you how I exactly went step by step to create a small version of a functioning solar power system that you can mount onto your roof. So I'm including all the steps that you would actually use and that I used on my actual house just behind camera. Your first job is to find the rafters, and you're not screwing into the sheathing ideally, you want to go into the structural lumber. So there's two ways to do this. First, you use the hammer test. It's cheap and you just tap across the deck and you listen. When you're over a rafter, it typically has a higher pitched sound. And between the rafters, there's kind of a hollow, bassy thud. So once you think you found one, you mark it with a crayon. A more surefire way is to use this rafter centerline locator. I'll put a link to this in the description in case you're interested. You drill a really small hole near where you suspect the rafter is, then you insert the tool and rotate it in both directions. It'll point to the exact center of the stud so long as you're within 3 inches of it. The mounts here are from a company called Snap and Rack, and there's no separate flashing on these. The butyl sealant is actually built right into the bottom of the base, so you just peel off the paper backing, press the mount onto the roof in the right place, and the sealant compresses as you tighten down the bolts. Going into a rafter, you use 2 bolts for this spec. If you can't hit a rafter, you can use these other 2 on the sides to hit 4 bolts and connect it to the deck that way. Rafter mounting is always stronger, so I'd highly recommend it whenever you can. I went with a 2-bolt right into the rafters for every mount on this install. Next, your rails slide into the mounts. Now these are the tracks that the panels clamp into. You get 2 parallel rails here. Your panel size is what determines the spacing, and the kit that you get will spec out all of that for you, but the general rule is not to let your panels stick out more than 1/3 of their width or their height past the rail system. One important note on the order of these things is that the microinverter goes on the rail before the panels do. This unit handles 2 different panels on 1 inverter, and the reason I'm mounting it now is for access. Once those panels are sitting on top, you really can't reach this thing without dismantling the whole array. Our next step is the rooftop junction box. This one's called a Solodeck, and it does 2 main jobs. One, it's a watertight transition through the roof, and also it's where the inverter's AC trunk cable lands and transitions to the standard 10-2 Romex that I'm allowed to run down through my attic. I'm mounting it now and sealing the roof penetration with the appropriate sealant, and then I wire the whole thing up completely before any panels go on the rails. I'm also connecting the ground from the rail into the Solodeck. It's the same logic as the microinverter. Just do it now with no panels above you. It's just easier and safer. With the rails, the inverter, and the grounding wire all in the Solodeck, all mounted up and wired, the panels are the last thing to go up. So you lift them up onto the rails, click in the MC4 connectors, these little guys from each panel into the microinverter. Positive to positive, negative to negative. And they're actually keyed, so you physically cannot get the polarity wrong. And next, you just clamp the panels down. You use what are called mid clamps in between the adjacent panels, and then end clamps on the outside corners. You finish with some end caps on the rails, and that is the entire roof portion knocked out. That 10-2 Romex that I mentioned before, it runs down through what would be the rafters in a rail installation, out through the side of the house and into an exterior junction box. This J-box right here is actually the transition. So Romex, it's basically rated for inside your house or inside your walls. It's not rated for exposure to sun and weather. So inside this box, I make a connection from the 10-2 Romex over to the 10-gauge THHN wire, which is totally okay to use outside the house. From this point on, everything is going to run through what's called liquid-tight non-metallic conduit. EMT is also commonly used for this, and that is completely fine to use. I'm just preferring liquid-tight in this scenario because I've got such a small set of runs that I'm doing. The next stop is the combiner panel. So on a larger system, this is where multiple inverter circuits would come together onto one feed to the main panel. And on a single circuit demo like this, it's basically a pass-through. The circuit lands on a 20 amp 2-pole breaker, and then it continues downstream. The code does require a visible, lockable AC disconnect between your solar and the grid. The point is so that a lineman or a firefighter, for example, can shut down the system from outside the house without having to go inside. If you throw this handle right here, the solar is totally isolated. The disconnect I'm using in this setup is 60 amps, which is way more than this 2-panel demo would ever need, but on a real install, you would size the disconnect to match your inverter's actual output. For an 18 kilowatt system like the one on my house, it is considerably larger. The install steps are identical, however, either way. Our last stop is the main service panel. And again, this should be pretty similar to something that you've got on your house. So the solar back feeds the panel through a dedicated circuit breaker. In this demo, I'm just using, again, a small 20 amp 2-pole breaker. Now, one critical detail here. That breaker needs to be as far away from your main breaker as possible. This is called the 120% rule, and it's how the code prevents the bus from being overloaded when the grid and the solar are both pushing into it at the same time. Your inspector is going to check this, so make sure you get it right the first time, because moving it later means you have to kill the power to the whole house and re-pull the breaker. Kind of a pain. Now that everything's wired up, this is the moment when your meter starts spinning backwards. Before you order anything when it comes to solar, there are 3 big decisions to make about how your system actually works. I'm going to go through each one of these really quickly. First, what kind of inverter? You just watched me install these micro inverters, but that is not your only option. My house, for example, uses a string inverter, where you've got one big unit, usually in your garage, that handles all the panels wired together in series. You've got fewer parts, lower cost per watt. It's easier to troubleshoot because there's only one inverter to look at. But the downside is that if even one panel gets shaded or fails, it could impact the entire string. Micro inverters, on the other hand, like this one here, they put a small inverter on every panel or every 2 panels. You pay more for the inverter side of the system, but every panel produces independently. That means shade on one panel doesn't kill the others. Now, both string inverters and microinverters have their own pros and cons, but they both do the job, and you can decide which makes the most sense for your particular rooftop. The second big decision you have to make is to go with batteries or no batteries. Now, without a battery, you are grid tied. That means if the sun is out, your panel's producing and your house uses it directly, with extra flowing back to the grid. Once the sun goes down, however, you draw from the grid just like normal. Now, a battery changes the picture completely. It stores extra production during the day, and it runs your house at night on that stored solar energy, and it also keeps you online in case the grid goes down. The downside, however, is cost. A useful battery setup, one that's actually going to do what you hope it will do, can easily add $10,000 to $20,000 to your install, depending on what you decide to go with. All of that leads us to our third decision, which is one that most installers don't really explain very well, but it might be the single most important number you need to know. When your panels produce more power than your house uses, the extra flows back to the grid. Your utility has to decide what to pay you for that. The 2 main approaches give you wildly different answers. So with net metering, every kilowatt hour you send back gets credited at the same rate that you pay to buy electricity. It's a 1-for-1 swap on your bill. If you pay 14 cents per kilowatt hour, you get 14 cents in credit for every kilowatt hour you export. Now, net billing, on the other hand, works totally differently. The utility credits you at a lower wholesale rate, while still charging you full retail price when you pull power from the grid. The math gets way less favorable in this case. California, for example, already made the switch with their NEM 3.0 rules, where export credits drop from way up at about 30 cents per kilowatt hour down to 4 to 8 cents. That is roughly a 75% cut in what you get paid for exports. Come on, California, that is so frustrating. There's also one more situation I want to be completely transparent about, and that is that solar is not right for everyone. If your power is cheap, if your roof has shade going across it, for example, or you're planning to move in the next few years, you might actually lose money on installing a solar system. With that in mind, I actually put together a totally free tool that you can use to find out if solar is worth it at all for you. And for a lot of you, the answer is going to be no. What this tool does is it asks you a few basic questions, and then it pulls in your local rates, including how much your power company pays you for your generated kilowatts of power versus what they charge you for them. And then it tells you straight up whether solar is worth it for your specific situation, like for this guy, or not like this guy. It'll also tell you about how long it's going to take to pay off a solar purchase, whether it's DIY or paying someone else to do it, and it will tell you about what size system you should have to offset your bills. Check out the link in the description or scan the code on screen right now. I highly recommend you run through this calculator before you spend a single dollar on solar. Now, if the tool says solar does make sense, the next question is, where do you get the gear? Solar Wholesale is where I purchased all of my 18 kilowatt system from on my own house that I installed last summer. They were kind enough to provide the gear for our little demo here that I put together. And the reason I like working with Solar Wholesale though is their model. You send them your address, your power bill, and some photos of your roof, and then they design the entire system. We're talking panel layout, inverter choice, what wire runs, everything. They even pull the permits with your local jurisdiction, and then they ship every part of what you need in one big kit. That's the panels, the rails, the inverter, conduit, wire breakers, disconnect labels, everything. Now that last part matters more than it sounds, because solar is one of those projects where missing a single fitting or a single label can fail your inspection. So getting it all in one box really solves that problem for you. I put a link to Solar Wholesale below if you want to check that out. And again, QR code is on the screen. Now, if the answer comes back that it's not a good fit right now, that is a legit answer. I'd rather you skip the solar than spend like 20 grand designing a system that won't pay you back. Run the tool first. If it says yes, head on over to Solar Wholesale and get a real design done for your roof, and you've got everything you need to do this yourself. Or you can also do the research and put the system together yourself if you prefer. At least you'll know if it's even worth it. If you found this video helpful, I'd love to hear about it in the comment section below. Especially I'd love to hear where you live and what you're paying per kilowatt hour. I will read every comment. If you want to see how I installed my DIY 18 kilowatt system on my house, check out this video right here. I'm Nils with Learn to DIY. Thanks for watching.